as I was listening to Ian and then Anthony, came to my mind, and I think Kamran planned it that way, because we started with Ian and gave us a very profound understanding that how we can possibly pursue what we talk about if they're not really framed in the law. And then we had a very enchanting and rather inspiring view of what the future economy looked like. So let me be a little bit basic about some of these issues. What I'm going to present to you, in fact, is based on what conventional economics talks about. I must really mention that I do have my own share of criticism of conventional economics, but for the moment, for this particular occasion, I'm going to stay with it and prove to you that even based on conventional economics, the way that we're talking about calculation of our cost, and in particular, the cost of renewable energy, is totally flawed. Even we will stay within the premise of what known as neoclassical economics. So what I want to do, I want to really put a few questions and try to answer them. And then in answering them, pretty much show to you that what we really generally believe, I'm sure that many of you don't, but a lot of people around the world do, or they hear it all the time from the media, that it's great to have energy from sun and from wind, but they are very expensive. And the cheapest form that we can really use would be fossil-based energy, gas, oil, and others. That's really one part of my talk. The other one is that I think I should really refer that to you, Ian, that should really one generation make decision when it really affects the life of other generations for many years to come? And do we really have any basic laws anywhere around the world that you can actually take someone to court, litigate, that what you're doing is going to really harm future generations? And then a very basic question. We talk about territories or regions, a country, another country, and I think Paul's wonderful vision of how arts can really go over all these artificial borders. Do we really have any borders for environmental degradation that we have? So with these three and a little time that I have, I'm going to be using my time efficiently, Kamran, don't worry about that. So let's start with the neoclassical paradigm. We talk about market efficiency. I teach economics. I've done it for maybe about 25, 30 years. And we talk about, what goes really to cost. And invariably in all the classes, we kind of preach and teach that it has to be all-inclusive cost. Otherwise, you've got a lot of problems. You overproduce. The optimal allocation of resources would be really impaired and all of that. So what is really cost? Cost, the way that I really define it, is everything we give up to make a decision. If it is measurable, if you can see it, call it implicit cost. If you can see it, and sometimes you cannot measure it, or you wonder how we can get there, which I think for economists is very good to listen to scientists, because there are a lot of ways that we can measure cost that we don't want to listen at all. Maybe we could really have a better grasp of what is called implicit cost. And then we come and say that efficiency is really totally ignored if you have, an underestimation of the cost, which I believe we're doing it all the time. So the other thing about the conventional economics is very, very important. We really think about property right? When I say we, I'm not particularly talking about myself, but I'm really putting that hat on. So I want you to kind of quite get that, the way that these conditions, that kind of discussion is really developing. So we talk about property rights, but we also know that for many of these issues that we talk about, we cannot really define property right, because two things really come in doing that. One is that difficulty in defining, distributing, and enforcing property rights. That's one of the issues that come up with property right. The other one is the cost of creation and operation of the markets. And quite honestly, many people, when you look at it without kind of reading the between the lines, they don't probably get it quite the second part, which is called high cost of creation and operation of markets, which means basically eats up the profit. There is no need for even you to be there. So that takes us to very, very basic analysis of market failure. We have market failure in many of these respects. Many of these fields that we talk about, they're not really marketable. Quality of air, river, ocean, all of these things that we're talking about, they're not marketable. There are no really market laws there. The economic degradation is failure of market and governments. Why governments? Because when you don't have market, you need government for two things. One is that to do what you should do, which is the production of public goods and services. Absolutely, according to neoclassical conventional economics, you have to have that. And the second one, if you have a market that doesn't operate and is inefficient, then you have to harness it. You have to have what is called, again, in conventional economics, second best, which means that you don't have the market forces there, then you have to create a mechanism within which the so-called market can operate. We don't do either of them. And that's, again, I'm not really talking about any new vision. I'm talking about vision which is at least 150 years old. So let's continue with that paradigm. So what do we really have? Simple. Externalities. Huge amount of externalities. Externalities are cost to third party, counting that the one who buys, the one who sells, the two parties, so it means the other. And the only simple rule in economics, again, this old conventional neoclassical economics, is that you have to internalize externalities if you're hoping for efficiency. Do we do it? Do we even try to do it? No. The answer is no. What we do, we keep talking about free market, but we know too well that doesn't exist. Simple. It's just deception, really. Now, the true cost of extracting oil from oil and gas. We don't really count externalities at all. We pretend that they're cheaper. And then we don't really put. And by the way, these rather cheap sources receive enormous amount of subsidy, which means a simple calculation. If you don't miscount cost, if you take your subsidy away, they are much cheaper to have them from what? The natural forces, sun, for others. Now, let's go, and that was the first part. I haven't seen the clock yet, so it means I haven't reached 10 minutes yet. Now, the other thing is about legal arguments for rights of the future generation. Like many of you here, I kind of had my own journey, university, learning, teaching for many years, researching, studying, then coming to what is called more balanced. Okay, just think about things that I really feel, things that intuitively I know. We call here your human emotions. And when I think about future generation, I appeal to something very simple. Everybody here loves their children. Everybody here loves the children of their children. If they're fortunate enough to live longer, they definitely see the fourth generation or the third generation after them, they love it. What about after that? I bet the same love exists. Now, where we are, 10 minutes, I'll wrap it up in about 2-3 minutes. In the tradition of the Indian American, they had a very profound and rather practicality is important. The 7-generation rule. Okay, so I won't read it because you can see it in my PowerPoint and also in my paper. 7-generation rule without better than sustainability, what we're talking about. And what do we do about that in our societies? Even doubtful if we think about our own generation. Now, the third question, the border issue. Is there really any border? There isn't. I remember that when tsunami happened in Japan, and there was some possibility of exposure to radiation, you couldn't find some of those tablets that apparently protect the young ones and the old ones against the possible radiation, because they knew that part of that would be felt in the shore of California, Japan and shore of California. So there is no border. Any of these issues. What we talk about, the problem of environment is global, period. It's global. It's everywhere. If you start somewhere, it goes there. In fact, like many other things in nature, things are global. So, here is the ugly things that, I think, Paul, you mentioned that. The atmospheric CO2. So we kind of passed it round about before 1990, really. It's kind of threshold level, 350. And this was actually taken like this, last month when I was coming here. So we are in 392 ppm, and you can see the slope of that line hasn't changed, despite all international gatherings that we have. So echoing what others have said earlier. So where that takes us, it takes us a very alarming picture of the future. And what is that? People first, they didn't say there was any scientific basis for any of these discussions. And then when the scientific evidence became evident, they totally actually ruled it out. They say that, well, it's their modernization, industrialization, economic growth, and all of that. And so that really put that all aside. But what we know is this, sure, we do know that there are changes in the environment. Again, I have to really skip a few slides fast and furious. But if you really look about it, yes, there are forces of nature that brings about. And again, as I have said in my presentation, in some of these places, maybe I have to go back, we have definitely know that over tens of thousands of years things will change. But what is changing is not in thousands of years. What is changing is even lucky hundreds. And we know that without a shred of doubt, this fast change, this problem that we're going to face is not because of the natural forces that bring changes in thousands of years. These changes are our economic way of living and managing our life is bringing about. And that is destruction of human being. Fair and square. With that, I did have some way to really go about it. What do we do? And I think I highlighted about 12 steps that we can do in order to bring our house in order, to bring our mind in order to create a better relationship with Earth, in order to use better science in economics, in order to do what we are called to do, and we have to do it if we believe in ourselves and the future generation to come. Thank you.